That's who it is, Rabbi Avram David Lavut, the rabbi of Nikolai of Ukraine, and he's also the Rebbe's great-grandfather. I shouldn't say also. He's the Rebbe's great-grandfather, and also happens to be my fifth-generation grandfather. So that's like our familial connection point is in this Rabbi Avram David Lavut. Wrote quite a bit, a few svarim, a few important books, and one of them is Shara Koilel. This Shara Koilel is a commentary on the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. So let's remember that a Siddur essentially, the Alter Rebbe didn't invent his own Siddur. We spoke about this before. Writing a Siddur doesn't mean you write your own text. This text comes from our sages thousands of years before. But in generations that passed on, there's different customs that evolve and different nuances to the text. And every now and again, you'll have a scholar that sits down and says, okay, let's make this grammatically correct, linguistically correct, historically correct, halachically correct. Right? We're learning about Yavutz on Shabbos. He wrote a Siddur, very important, famous Siddur. And the Alter Rebbe also wrote one. And Siddurs come along with instructions. Right? So the Siddur would say, insert this paragraph, this paragraph, this paragraph. Stand here, say this. Sit down, say this. Right? So there's a halachic commentary as well as the formulation of the liturgy that should be said. So the Alter Rebbe made such a Siddur. And for whatever reason, the Siddur, I guess, got lost, or the original manuscripts got lost. I'm not really sure. But sometime later, Rabbi Avram David Lavut, who lives, as you can see on the top of the page, 1815 to 1890, which is not long after the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe passed away in 1812. So we're talking about within 50, 60, 70 years of the Alter Rebbe's passing. He made it his mission to collect as many versions as he can of the printed Siddur that were presumably copied from the manuscript, and to rectify it in what became the Siddur Torah, which is like the authoritative Siddur of the Alter Rebbe. And he wrote a commentary on the Alter Rebbe Siddur, so explaining the Alter Rebbe's choice of liturgy, choice of word, choice of instruction. So I said that I would look up his book to see his commentary on Al-Kain, and indeed he does have a nice little commentary. So we're going to look at that with Hashem's help. We're going to take some detours on the way before we get there to tell you a little bit about Rabbi Avram David, hope you don't mind, and a special Montreal connection. And I'll share with you some things I did not know. I shouldn't say discovered, but I learned new things that I did not know, specifically Montreal connection and connection with my father's family and my father's side, which the connection with my father's family I knew, but there's certain details about the founding of the Montreal community that I did not know that I found in doing a little research here. So let's begin. So on top of the page there, you'll see the text there. There's three lines of text. Yeah. So the three lines of text come from a different work that Rabbi Avram David Lavut wrote. I think it's the Beis Aaron. And as an introduction to that book, the Rebbe, which is the great-grandson of the author, right, the great-grandson of Rabbi Avram David Lavut, as well as the official publisher of Chabad, right? That was one of his first jobs when he came to America before he was Rebbe, was to run the Chabad publishing house, which is Kahas. That was one of his first original jobs. And a lot of the Hasidic manuscripts that have been published in the last 50, 60 years is the Rebbe's doing. Saying before he became Rebbe, that was his big doing. He was collecting manuscripts and publishing them and so on. So he wrote a little bio on his great-grandfather's introduction to one of his other works. And there he describes his great-grandfather as follows. Avram David ben Marinahav Yehuda Leib Lavut, Avram David, son of Yehuda Leib Lavut, Baal Mechaber Sefer Kavnaki, author of the book Kavnaki, as well as emendations to the laws of how to write a get. That was one of his expertise of Rabbi Avram David Lavut, is how to write a get properly. When you write a get, you have to write the name of the people correctly, as well as the name of the city and river in which you are writing the get properly. And that was one of his efforts as a linguist to properly write in Hebrew lettering, secular names or Yiddish names or name of a river. How do you write it down and using Hebrew letters? There's a whole book on that. So Noiled Bishnas Tovkuf Ein He is born in the year Tovkuf Ein He. Tovkuf Ein He would be 1815, as I read on the top there. His Rebbe describes him as a person. He excelled in his sharp intellect. His Kashernis are his talents, and now that are elevated, like his extreme talents. I don't know how you say that.
Very talented.
He's very talented. His great talents, I should say, and so he excelled in his sharp intellect, his great talents, and his broad knowledge in the sea of the Talmud. Gambit Kosai, as well as in his piety, B'toyev Levi in his good-hearted nature, Kanalai Maritzim Rabim, acquired for him many great admirers, Asher Rachshalai Ava Rabba Kol Yamav, who felt for him a great love for all of his life. He was a beloved and well-known scholar. The first picture you're looking at there is something very unique. The first picture there, you see where it says atop Haskamas? Mm-hmm. It's unique because this Avram David Lavut was first a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, and when Tzemach Tzedek passed away, he followed the Tzemach Tzedek's successor in Lubavitch, which is the Tzemach Tzedek's younger son, Rabbi Shmuel, then Rabbi Menashe, which is without getting into too much history there, but there were other brothers, older brothers of the Menashe themselves became Chabad Rebbes in other towns outside of Lubavitch, and they had bigger crowds actually. Most of the Tzemach Tzedek's chassidim did not follow his son, the youngest son, the Rebbe Menashe in Lubavitch. Most of them followed other the Rebbes in Kapust and Yeshin, in Liadi and other places. But this Avram David Lavut stayed loyal to the house of Lubavitch, in the seat of Lubavitch, which is the Tzemach Tzedek's youngest son, the Rebbe Menashe. And this Rebbe Menashe, Rabbi Shmuel, wrote a approbation, like a haskama, when you like give your stamp of approval on someone else's book. He wrote one such haskama for another book called the Beis Aaron that Rabbi Avram David Lavut wrote, which is very unique that a Rebbe should write a approbation to a book. As a rule, the Rebbeim refrain from doing so. Many times, people would send our Rebbe, their books, and the Rebbe would say, "I'm sorry, it's the custom of the Chabad Rebbes that we don't write approbations for books. But God bless you, much success or whatever." But official, I agreed to this book. The Rebbeim didn't do that. But here, Rabbi Shmuel, as you can see here, it says in the bottom, Shmuel, Rabbi Shmuel, the Menashe did write such one. And then you could see the author's signature, and then the stamp there of his official seal. It's a little paragraph there where he asks people not to break the halachic copyright laws in his book. And it's stamped with his stamp there. It says Avram David Lavut, Moed Tzedek, Kehila, Nikolayev, halachic instructor of the rabbi of the community of the Kalayev.
Could it be two names, David and David?
Avram, David, two names.
So could David be?
David, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Yeah, I read in English. It's better choice.
Like Hebrew.
In Hebrew, it's one, Daled, Vav, Daled. That's it. It's the only way to sell it. It's a question of the Kudus. Do you say David with a kamatz or Patach David? It's a Sephardic pronunciation, Ashkenazi pronunciation. Same name. Daled, Vav, Daled in Lashon Kodesh. It's a proper Ashkenazi pronunciation would be David, not David. Or David. That proper old Ashkenazi would be David. Okay, so now the Montreal connection on page 2, next page there. I knew tangentially a little bit about the story, but I didn't know as much as I know now, which I'm sharing with you. It's very exciting for me. Okay, so if start from the bottom of the page, actually, of page 2, continuing in that biography that Rebbe wrote, Rebbe writes about Avram David Lavut's children and family. He writes, from his first marriage, he had a daughter, Bela Rivka, goes on to describe their children, okay? So if you look at the second line, he says that from his first marriage, he had a daughter, Bela Rivka, and then they had children, and their children were Meir Shlomo. Meir Shlomo is his grandfather, who my son is named after. And then at the end of the third line, there's a name Mindel. That's Avram David Lavut's granddaughter, Mindel. That would be my grandmother's grandmother. Is this Mindel? Okay. On the last word on the third line. Then it says, his second wife, I assume his first wife passed away, so he remarried. He married a Polish woman named Pesia Hochstein, the Num Reb Menashe, that a son named Menashe Lavut. Now he had children, Chaim Yitzchak, Avram David, Yisrael Leib, Soichrim Canada, who are business people in Canada. So Avram David Lavut's grandchildren from his second marriage, his son Menashe from his second marriage, and his children are in Canada. So who's this Menashe Lavut? So do a little digging, and here's a picture of him, top of the page. Third from the left with a white beard, that's Rabbi Menashe Lavut. And then the middle with the black beard, that's the famous Chazan Yossel Rosenblatt.
Mhm.
And then the third from the left with the big long beard is the famous Herschel Cohen. It's
Third from the left.
third from the left. Third from the left white beard is Menashe Lavut. Third from the right with the long white beard, with the long beard is Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Cohen, the first chief rabbi of Montreal. And this is some sort of commit. This is, you can see in the top of the description there, in 1918, some sort of Jewish committee of relief for the war effort, I suppose. I guess because this is 1918, so it's a little bit after World War One. There must have been immigrants, so there were some committees that got together to help the Jews, I assume. So he's clearly, this Menashe Lavut is an important figure here in Montreal. Do a little more digging, and it turns out, so that there's a I don't have it on the page there, but I have it over here on my screen. There's a website called Canadian Jewish Heritage Network, and they have in their archives old Jewish newspapers, and in one newspaper called the Kender Adler, which is an old Yiddish newspaper here in Montreal. You know this?
Sure, my grandpa used to read
Your grandfather used to read it. There you go. So in there appears an obituary for this Menashe Lavut, and in it he's described as founded the local Chabad organization. On the official corporation of the Nusach HaRishol, this Menashe Lavut is cited there as one of the incorporating founders. And so another obituary also says similar things. So anyway, I emailed them asking them for a copy of the look. So for a couple of bucks, they're going to email me clippings of the newspapers in which he appears. But it seems like this might be the first LUBAVITCHER rabbi. I'm not sure if his official position is rabbi or some sort of Chabad leader in Montreal. So and moreover, so in the previous Rabbi writes a letter to this Menashe Lavut in 1929. Not 29. The previous Rabbi writes a beautiful letter to him. Says that the letter opens up like this: I was happy to hear from you. You're doing well, and thank you very much for your blessings, including the blessings of the Chabad community there in Montreal. This is 1929, and from the thank you for the blessings from the community of our people, Chabad Hasidim, who daven in two Nusach HaRishols in Montreal. Previously, I was telling this. In 1929, there's two Lubavitch shoals in Montreal. Did you do that? Two Chabad shoals in Montreal in 1929. I had no idea. And thank you very much for your blessings and so on. And then the previous goes on to tell Menashe a whole teaching about the importance of reaching out to your fellow Jew, encouraging to come with you to learn Torah. And even though externally they might look like they're not interested, but deep down they're a Jew, and therefore you fan their flames, you'll see they're going to respond. In other words, you're telling him, you got to be the shliach in Montreal. You got to. So as much as there's two Chabad shoals, I don't know that they look like the way Sholem Westbury did. I don't know if that means they had long white beards and black hats, but I imagine it means that they came from Lubavitch families or Chabad families back in Russia, and therefore they felt more comfortable in a Chabad Orthodox shul. So they went to Nusach, but they probably had clean-shaven beards, I assume. But this Menashe Lavut kept his beard, and I guess therefore, because his father was this great Rabbi Nikolaev, author of books, and because of them, I assume he played some sort of leadership role, as evidenced by this letter. And it concludes at the end, and therefore I'm turning to you. You're known as a understanding man who can think well. Please take these words to heart, how to help other people and to establish times for teaching Torah and serving Hashem and bringing people's hearts together and the spirit of Chassidus, and wake up the branches that they reconnect to their roots. In other words, he's telling them, wake up these branches, meaning these Chabad, these children of Chabad families, they should reconnect to their roots of Chabad from back in the day. That's what I assume. But two full Chabad shows that I did not know existed in Montreal. So it seems like it was kind of active. Obviously, this is before the famous 9 shluchim came to Montreal, so there was no yeshiva established, which meant there's no real continuity until these 9 Hasidim came. Sorry?
There was a yeshiva on Park Avenue.
Not a Chabad yeshiva. There was a small Talmud Torah, right? I think. I don't know. I shouldn't know. I don't know.
No, that was on St. Joseph.
That came later. That came in the 40s.
Yeah.
Right. This is 1920s. This is 20 years earlier.
There was a yeshiva on Park Avenue in between Fairmount and St. Vita.
Right. That was in the 40s. This is 1920s. 1929. This Menashe arrived in Montreal in 1905 after the Russian Revolution with the wife and kids. In 1910, based on what I found online, this Menashe lost his wife, who was 48. He lost the son a little while later, who was 17 years old. Lost one of his sons. He that same year he incorporated Nusach Hari, 1910, And that same year, he signed his citizenship papers, 1910. It's a busy year for him, 1910, apparently. He lost a wife, lost a child. I won't forget, yeah.
My grandfather was annoying because they both came from Russia, same, in the 1860s.
So he came in 1905. So there was one wave that came after the pogroms, which is in the late 1880s, I think. And then this is 1905, after the first Russian Revolution. Anyway, the bottom picture there is a picture of his grave, which is here at Back River. I had no idea I would have gone to visit if I knew. Anyway, there are grandchildren of Lavut who live here in Montreal. My parents know who some of them are. And they're distant cousins. And just to close the story out with two notes before we get to our learning, the first note is that this Menashe Lavut's children, the Rebbe reached out to in the 1940s. So this Menashe Lavut passed away in 1931. So his children, who the Rebbe didn't really know, as is evident by some of the letters, but at some point it seems like the Rebbe didn't meet one of them. So it seems like one of them went to visit the Rebbe in New York. But anyway, Deborah writes for the Kramer in 47, asking Rabbi Kramer to organize for a visa for my great-grandfather to come to Montreal to be a rabbi here, my father's grandfather. And the end was the previous Rebbe nixed the idea and said that he should go to Australia instead. But Divrei Tzadikim Kayaman, the words of the righteous, are fulfilled. And if the Rebbe instructed that Isser Klubgrant come to Montreal, then it wasn't fulfilled with him, but it's fulfilled with his grandson, my father, and myself as well. So that's one little circle to the story. And then finally, connecting to our learning today, it's clear from a few letters that the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe reached out to this family Lavut, this Menashe Lavut's family's children, this Menashe Lavut's children, asking them for a copy of a manuscript of this book, Shara Kola, that we're about to learn from, so that they can republish it. They must have had some manuscripts from their grandfather, this book. So those letters were like Deborah writes to Rabbi Kramer, or Deborah writes to Rabbi Greenglass, actually, saying, please talk to Lavuts, please encourage them to send us as fast as we can. And then a little while later, a letter saying, thank you very much, we got it. Both from the previous Rebbe and the Rebbe. So it seems like they worked together to get manuscripts for this book, Shara Kola, from this Lavut family. So that's a little bit background on this Shara Kola. Okay, so let's begin at least a little bit, and then we'll continue tomorrow, so we'll finish everything.